with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
He's the participant and he is a counterfeiter. There should be a picture on Time magazine with him flying a helicopter pushing out money. Congressman, he's known for saying that he's helicopter banned.
Aloha mai kako, you are watching Hawaii Political Reporter.
Aloha, and thank you for watching Hawaii Political Reporter. Tonight, Bob Petricci of the Puna Pono Alliance on Geothermal and Environmental Problems, the PLDC, the state takeover of Hawaii counties, and alternative energy.
So, you know, we think that geothermal really is being put in place to benefit the status quo, the Helco, HEI, Heco, the electric companies, and basically the monopoly that we have now. What's happening is because the rates in Hawaii are so high and our solar resource is so good, that people are leaving the grid in record numbers. And every year the number of...
We'll also find out who is Jill Stein, Green Party presidential candidate. Aloha, with me now is Bob Petricci of the Puna Pono Alliance. Bob is here to talk about geothermal on Hawaii Island, the Public Land Development Corporation, and energy for Hawaii and Hawaii County. Bob, thanks again for being here, and could you please go ahead and tell us about your organization and what you do?
All right, thanks, Ross. Puna Pono Alliance was formed when we found out that they were going to do this, the state's planning a huge geothermal development here on the Big Island. Depends on who you talk to. The governor was talking about 1,000 megawatts. The geothermal working group, that was a state organization, county organization to study the issues, talking about 1,400 megawatts, which we're talking about 20 or 30 giant plants. Right now we have about 20 companies that are interested in doing geothermal exploration on the island, and they're using Department of Energy monies. So they're basically, it's a free-for-all, tax dollars, where, so anyway, Puna Pono Alliance we believe that geothermal is a mistake for health reasons, for economics, and for the future of Hawaii. We think that, decentralized power, or moving away from large centralized power plants with big expensive distribution systems is the future. That's what we see happening around the world. So we don't want to see this happen. They're going to build this in a lava zone 1 area, which leaves us vulnerable to the plants can be destroyed or disrupted, earthquakes or different things, and then it creates a problem. It's very expensive. We keep hearing geothermal is cheap and it's safe and it's it's renewable, it's clean.
Hey, I think I've heard that before. If you play,
yeah,
maybe.
Well, I've lived in this geothermal for 30 years, as has a lot of the people out there in Puna Pono Alliance, and we're here to tell you that that's not true. Look at your bill. We've had geothermal for 30 years. Is your power cheap?
Bob, you brought up a whole plethora of objects actually there, and one of the things, now you said health reasons, okay, and you also said it's not clean. So maybe the two relate, okay, could you tell us why? What's the difference? I think most of us think of the geothermal being just steam. I mean, hot steam being produced, but that's not the case in Hawaii, is it?
That is not the case. There's different types of geothermal. And Hawaii is a unique type of geothermal where it's over a hot spot on the mantle, the Earth's mantle. In places like California and a lot of the other places, they have a different type of resource. And a lot of those places, the steam is relatively clean. Here, it's very, very toxic. We have
that's the hydrogen sulfides, I guess. That we
the hydrogen sulfide
byproduct.
levels can be twice the lethal level. Like if you breathe it, you die. That's how high it is when it comes out of the wellhead. And so there's also other things though: mercury, lead, radon. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this resource. It's not a clean resource. So they say that they re-inject it and control it that way, but they have leaks all the time. Whenever there's a lightning strike or something else that knocks, they can't send the power to Helco. They lose a pole or a line. They have to shut the wells in, and they have leaks. Clean outs of the wells. Just all kinds of things, and they cover it up. The real problem with PGV is they're not transparent at all. They don't give us the information on the leaks. They keep saying, yes, we'll give you the information, and they never do. So a lot of people out there have been sick. We've been asking for a health study for over 20 years, and we just can't seem to get one. And you would think, because PGV and some of the pro-geothermal argument is that it's safe, and you would think they would want that health study because if it's going to prove that the power plant is safe, then you would want to do the study and get this over with.
I think, and I'd imagine this, I know I myself personally, if it was safe and if it was clean, bringing jobs to Hawaii and of course using a nice clean renewable energy, I think we'd all be for it, and I'd imagine you would be too.
I didn't start out being opposed to geothermal. I lived there before they started the geothermal power plant, and I didn't have a problem with it until they started it, and we started having emissions in the neighborhood, and I started getting sick. And I started asking questions about the county, and told me, don't worry, don't make trouble. We'll get rid of you. We'll move you. And that went on for a couple of years. And after about 2 years, I realized that they weren't going to do anything. And the experimental plant was supposed to run for 2 years. They ran it for 8 years. So
Bob, I actually have worked near there, and I'll tell you, like I've told you prior, I've been neutral on this issue myself. I certainly would like to see everybody have every job and have every ability to make money in a responsible way, in a legal, clean way that they could. But, I myself have been right next to that. I've done some work there, and I've smelt emissions. Okay, now I know, and I've in varying degrees. Okay, now I know if I was living there on a full-time basis, not having, occasional, 2 times a year, that really would have to make me pretty darn angry, I would imagine. And I'm just curious, how far away do you live? Okay, from the plant?
I lived a half a mile from the plant for many years, and I finally, they say they have a relocation program, so I had applied for relocation. but I couldn't qualify. And I had been there before, but they have all these technical reasons why you couldn't qualify. In all of the years, like it was 10, 20 years, two people had only been able to qualify. So I finally sold my house for $75,000. I took a $150,000 loss on my house.
Were you in Leilani? Or
I was in Leilani Estates, and I took that loss because I didn't want to live there anymore, and I knew they weren't going to relocate me.
And you were there again prior to it being built?
I was there before the HGPA began to operate and before PGV was built or any of it.
You know, I know that we may not want to get too much into depth, and you know, health is such a difficult subject because there's so many variables with it. But maybe you could tell me some things, and I don't know, people, if you've ever smelt hydrogen, sulfuric acid.
It's hydrogen sulfide.
Yeah, or well, sulfur. With excuse me, I was
there's
thinking about batteries. It's kind of like a battery, so it's kind of the same smell. It's a little bit rotten.
It smells like rotten
rotten,
eggs.
Yeah. And it's not fun, and it really can be quite overwhelming. And we know it can be toxic. Now, again, not to be alarmist or anything like that, but why are you so convinced that this has been the specific thing? I mean, is it because you've been smelling it? Because it's obvious you can smell it. This is not something that has no fragrance.
Well, I lived there, and there were everybody around us in the beginning. Back when the old plant worked, they didn't re-inject. They vented it to the atmosphere for 8 years, and everybody was sick. After that 2 years I talked about, where I tried to work with the county, and I finally realized that they weren't going to help us. I went door to door in the neighborhood. I didn't know my neighbors. It's a real country kind of place, It's agricultural. But I just went around the neighborhood. I went to every house in the neighborhood, and I knocked on the door, and I just asked them, what's going on. And every house was sick. Everybody that I talked to. I got 32 letters, and I took them to the newspaper in Hilo, and they published the letters, and that's when the whole geothermal story started.
Okay, well, I think anybody with a decent amount of consciousness and conscience, I should say, would definitely not want people to be sick just simply by living in their house. I mean, and nor do we want to punish anybody who's trying to do something decent and well.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the economics, okay, and you also got into decentralized versus centralized. Now, economics. What is your point? I mean, you're saying that you don't think this is going to be economically correct, and you have a trajectory or a kind of a history that you've been mentioning to me from what the government's done in the past. Could you please tell me a little bit about that?
I could. Would you mind if I finish the health real quickly?
Sure, absolutely.
On the health thing, well, the biggest problem with PGV is they put it in a pre-existing residential neighborhood with no buffer zones and no setbacks. So it's a very dangerous industry. We talked about we didn't talk about it. They've had blowouts and all these major leaks, but there's also another part of that, and that's long-term low-level exposure, because the OSHA standards and the standards that they use are for healthy adults in a working environment, and that's how they set their levels. But you have infants, you have old people, people with respiratory disease, that there's another aspect to this, and that's long-term low-level exposure to these emissions. And there's studies on all of this being done, and there hadn't been a lot of studies on the low-level exposures, and part of the reason is because that extends to the oil and gas industry, it extends to the paper pulp industry. There's a lot of industries, sewage plants that produce hydrogen sulfide, and if it turns out that there's a low-level problem with health impacts,
You'd have tremendous ramifications.
so you're up against a lot in the professional industry as far as studies go. And we finally got these studies. We got the EPA now has said that long-term low-level exposure is a problem. So I just wanted to touch on that before we moved on.
I think that's excellent, and I'd like to make a comment about where they should be placed. But you know what? Let's really paint a picture here. Tell us how it actually feels. Because I know I work with batteries a lot, and that is a sulfuric acid. It's a sulfur, though, and of course we've all been or a lot of us have been to the volcano and smelt around there. Tell us, how does your mind feel? How do your lungs feel? What does it feel like when you're breathing this?
Well, it's scary for one because you can smell it, and it's a neurotoxin. So there's a lot of different impacts, and it also can affect your respiratory. They find higher incidences of colds and that kind of stuff.
Well, have you ever been I've heard people oxygen is obviously critical, I mean, that's the number one thing, I mean, for your
Well,
life there. So, I mean, have you had experiences where you've been made dizzy, headaches? I mean, what does it exactly do?
Dizzy, headaches, and just all different kind of, that kind of thing, lethargic, hard to move around, and you just don't feel well. But I also was very, very sick one time during a leak, and I was so sick I couldn't drive my car. And so I know you had Harry Kim in here talking earlier. At that time, he was head of civil defense. So I called him, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and he came out and took me to the hospital because I couldn't. And that was directly related to a release from the HGPA power plant.
You got to give it, that's pretty commendable. That's dedication.
Yeah,
to the job,
I got to tell you, yeah, because I don't know what I was going to do if he hadn't done that. And so I think he's well aware of what's going on too. He was there from the beginning.
Okay, well, let's look at this. And you brought up a good point, and this is a residential area, and nobody wants. I'm certainly not anti-corporate or anti-capitalist if it's done, not hurting the people, but and they have a gigantic amount of capital, of course, in that, and I'm sure they could, of course, probably make this better. But it's one thing with an existing, but to be expanding tremendously, you're saying 20 or 30 times, maybe?
That's what I would say. The governor. That's what the governor's saying. That's what.
So obviously, to power the whole state out of our island.
They want to power the whole state, and basically, I think what's happened, and this leads us into another area, is what's happened in Honolulu. They've created an unsustainable situation over there for their power, and how they've developed Honolulu. It's not very sustainable. So now they're looking to the outer islands for the resources to sustain them, and so we, part of this thing is, they're telling us how we should do our developments and what we need to do, and we look at Honolulu and we say, wow, you guys didn't do a very good job over there in Honolulu. So, we'd like to maintain our own independence, and, we think we can make these decisions ourselves. We don't necessarily think what's best for Honolulu is best for Hawaii County.
Yeah,
and it's not that we don't want to help you guys. We think there is a solution, but it doesn't involve a $16 billion cable or an extension cord from the Big Island.
You'd certainly think, if you're going to do this is something, I'm going to shock you. I've studied nuclear physics, and a lot of people don't know there's a gigantic range of reactors, including some that are incredibly safe. But, this is actually, to me, and I've heard this comment, I would say it, this sounds actually more dangerous than a lot of the newer generation 4 and 5 nuclear technology. And one thing I always can never fathom with the nuclear industry, and with this one I'm seeing now, if you're going to build it, why put it in a residential area? Why not put it in the middle of nowhere, truly in the middle of nowhere? I mean, if that's a whole nother matter. And I just can't imagine if they're going to ramp this up and put it right around residential. And then on top of it, as your point, and there are 2 great points, of what Honolulu's done. Obviously, maybe they're trying to change that. God bless them. They're trying to address that. But we don't see a lot of track record here. And I think they need to maybe slow down. I think most of us on this island would say, hey, hold on. Maybe we actually have a model and a knowledge that could work a lot better for you guys. Instead of imposing your city, consume more than you can actually reproduce and sustain model, maybe some things, could be learned from here. And Russell Ruderman, as you probably know, has a large plan to bring in a sustainable development here, which I think could be very beneficial. So let's go back to a second after that little diversion there we just took, and talk about, you're saying Honolulu, it's not been developed properly. How could they do better? What is our model here? What would you suggest, or what other alternatives could you see?
Well, I would say we should learn from the mistakes of Honolulu and Maui, in particular, when I look at what's happened over there with the large-scale resort developments and the traffic problems they've created and congestion, and now they can't meet their own power needs, and water. They're going to have real problems with water. They've contaminated a lot of their water over there. From sugar cane and pineapples and the military, and so a lot of the water on Oahu is contaminated, and they're taking water now from the windward side, but they're going to, as they continue to grow, I think water's going to be, and energy are going to be their big issues. So on energy, though, we are the southernmost state in the United States. We have the best solar resource in the whole United States. In the first 3 months of this year, Hawaii has added 14.6 megawatts of solar power. and it's much cheaper than geothermal. And you know, a big part of why does our power cost so much in Hawaii, and a big part of that is the transmission lines. It's over half of what we pay for our electric bill is to move the power around just on these islands. And if we're going to now move it inner island, it takes 100 megawatts just to push the power from here to Oahu. So if you put in 101 megawatts, you get 1 megawatt on Oahu.
Let's look at that. And I actually know a lot about this because I've studied this in physics classes and sustainable energy classes, and I'm an electrician and I'm a solar contractor, so I know this subject fairly well. There are a couple of different things going on. First off, as far as the transmission loss, depending upon the distance, the voltage of the lines, etc., you could lose actually up to 2/3, okay? But it could be a lot less than that. But you have to actually go back another step, and these are a couple relevant facts to people in Hawaii if they don't know them. First off, the actual internal combustion engine, any of them, okay, and even the geothermal, I'm sure, is going to have some efficiency loss. The actual usual internal combustion engine, that a lot of them are running, let's say diesel generator, 20 to 30% efficiency. If they're on a steam turbine, still, due to Carnot's law, okay, and if you people know what that is or look it up, it's worth understanding, you're going to probably only generate a third, maybe 40% at the most, okay, of that energy that you're putting in, you're actually going to get back out, and that is before it goes through the transmission line. So solar is much more efficient in that regard. The problem for solar is and I think where they may be looking at this is base load, because obviously solar is half. But there are other technologies and things that could be done, and for the amount of money that's in play here, I would imagine a tremendous amount of very good decentralized solutions could be made, and that could help the people, benefit the people, and give a lot of more independent people, including people like me, contractors, you know, and people in the trade, a lot more work, okay, and be helpful along that line.
It's really hard to cover this in a half an hour, but to point out the work, like, because I've heard you mention employment a few times. So in Hawaii County, the new phone book has 46 solar contractors, which are companies that employ people. So you have 46 companies right now working in solar in Hawaii County. So we have many more employees already in the solar industry than we do with the one geothermal power plant. So solar will create a lot more jobs. It's a much bigger growth industry than this geothermal plan that they have. So you know, there's no negative there. The problem with geothermal is it's very expensive. You know, you have the $16 billion cable, then you have PGV costs $200 million to build the power plant, then you have to build new transmission lines and all that stuff, and they're going to move to what they call the smart grid now, and the smart grid is going to cost billions of dollars, where they have to be able to run power in different directions instead of just one direction.
This to me is one thing, and you've pointed it out, I've heard you say, and it really does make a lot of sense. You cannot even get insurance on a house in a lot of these zones, okay, where they want to put this. And now we're going to be talking about our whole energy future, or gigantic part of it, put down in the same area where you can't even get insurance on a house. I mean, if that did get knocked out or substantially knocked out, where's the money going to come from again? Because I tell you, Uncle Dan's not going to be around forever. Okay, he's not. Okay, so that's it. We've lost it. It's done.
Well, the taxpayers are funding this stuff, and some people should understand is I started to talk about earlier. You have 20 companies now here. They're all getting Department of Energy money to do this exploration. They're not risking anything, so they're getting paid. They're making their
paid
profits.
To play.
All of this thing to do all of this exploration. We're paying for all of it, just like we paid for it before. And ORMAT, as an example, PGV got $8 million in grants in 2009. They got $528 million in TARP money last year. We could take that money. I'll tell you, $16 billion for the cable. Okay, you could take $10 billion. You can put a solar system on every house in the state of Hawaii. This is a scam. Geothermal is a scam. It's a corporate government idea to save. How do you preserve this monopoly, which is a cash cow? They've been milking us. They have been milking us for decades, and they do not want to give that up. And this is how they're going to try to keep that going, because people are leaving Helco and going solar because solar is cheaper. So they're trying to figure out how they're going to, you know, save Helco, when really energy policy in the state of Hawaii should be about what's best for us. Because what we really need is cheap power. We do need cheap power, because then we can have a better economy. Businesses can run, and we'll have more money in our pockets to spend. And this geothermal is a huge mistake. It's going to cost us, and it's I think Malama Solomon and Dela Cruz, what's his name, the senator that's pushing this thing, and Denny Kaufman and Abercrombie and Brian Schwartz, they should all be removed from office. They're either ineffective or incompetent or complicit with this. I mean, these are the same people that have put us in the position that we're in right now. We have the highest electricity, we have all of these problems, and they're now going to come to the rescue and save us with the PLDC and with geothermal. And really, who do they work for? Who do they represent? They represent the corporations. They don't have our best interests at heart, and geothermal is a perfect example of that.
You know, something along that line, I would have to, unfortunately, mostly agree. And even if they did have our best intentions, and maybe some of them do, okay, by the time it's executed and gone down the line, it's certainly not done efficiently, it's certainly not done effectively, and it is incredibly risky.
Part 2 of Bob's interview later this week. Also coming up this week, Harry Kim on geothermal, and we'll also meet Russell Ruderman.
Hi, I'm Jill Stein. I'm running for president with the Green Party. I'm asking for your vote in November, and I wanted to give you a little bit of my background and tell you why I'm running. I'm a mother and a medical doctor, and I have about 25 years of clinical practice behind me. And I had been in that practice for about 10 years or so when I really felt like things just weren't going right. I had actually just turned 40 and saw the world going in a direction that didn't look so good in terms of our economy and jobs and the healthcare system, which was clearly broken, and especially in terms of our health. And I found as a doctor in the clinic and a doctor involved in my community that we were seeing this epidemic of children's diseases, of learning disabilities and attention deficit disorders and cancer and asthma, and then obesity and diabetes. And what was happening? Our genes weren't changing, but our health was kind of heading in the very wrong direction. So I got to work with Physicians for Social Responsibility and various community groups. Some of us, part of what we did was to try to clean up our incinerators and our coal plants because we learned that this was contributing to some toxic exposures that were having an impact and were the drivers of some of those health conditions. And, we looked at some of the causes, and I thought, well, gee, I'm a doctor and involved with the community. I'll go talk to my legislator, which I did. And I discovered it really didn't matter because having life-saving and money-saving solutions was not what politics was about, that it was really about who had the money. And that was really the driver of our political system and policy. I found that incredibly frustrating as a mother. I also saw our healthcare system in incredible trouble, and yet we had a Medicare for All system that was really within our reach. It would save us a lot of money, improve our health and the healthcare system, and that too was a no-go with our politicians, as in the past, in the recent administration, taking Medicare for All off the table, which is what the White House did. So, the long and the short of it, when people ask me what kind of medicine I'm practicing now, I say I'm practicing political medicine because it really is the mother of all sicknesses. If we're going to fix these problems, and there are great solutions for all of them, we have to first fix the broken political system, and let's make that work. In short, that's why I'm running, because there are great solutions out there, and we need to change the political system as part of the way forward to actually implement those good solutions. So I ask you to go to my website, jillstein.org, and please join the team if this makes sense to you, that we need a healthy political system which is fundamentally reformed and fundamentally different from the corporate mainstream parties. That this is the way forward to get those solutions that we need, be part of that solution. You can make a contribution to the campaign, you can volunteer, you can network, get on Facebook, like, share, and repost, and let's get the word out and go viral. And we can use this election to turn a breaking point into a tipping point and start to take back the promise of our democracy and the peaceful, just, green future that really is within our reach. Thank you so much.
In 1913, the money power of the country was taken away from the people, but it was given up Federal Reserve Act. The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express.
You try a hide and this show of freedom, man. You sick agenda. We know you anti-American. You come forward American Constitution. 1913, corrupt in the system. Devalue dollar, hyperinflation. The Federal Reserve, controlled by Lucifer. He can see you lying.